the church has a very highly defined moral code, because it is this kind of moral code that nurtures healthy families and that nurtures healthy individuals, that nurtures healthy children, where children grow up in a family with both parents, with the extended family around. They know who they are. They understand they understand themselves as unique persons, because personhood and personal identity comes from relationships. And if your relationships are the definition, become the definition of your person, of your very being, what happens when those relationships are broken? I mean, it damages, it fundamentally damages one's self-concept. And we see that over and over and over and over again. In what, 60% of children come from broken homes? This validation of divorce, which began back probably in the 40s, I believe, was one of the first steps in the destruction of the family. Because up until that time, it was unthinkable to get divorced. You know, couples fight; they have issues, but the reality is they can work them out if they're willing. If they're willing. If they're not willing, there's not much you can do. But the goal in marriages in the Orthodox Church is that the couple will essentially pledge to work out any difficulty that they encounter, any difficulty whatsoever, and that marriage is something that is not only till death do us part, as it is in the West, but that marriage is forever, because it's a union of souls in Christ. And our whole theology of marriage is not about that it's some kind of contract between two individuals, but rather that it's a sacred, consecrated union between two people who have united themselves to one another in Christ by the Spirit. So we take marriage very, very seriously. Now, the Lord's teaching on this is we need to remember that the Lord had rather strict teaching about divorce. It says that if a man looks at a woman lustfully, he's already committed adultery with her. And if you divorce your wife, you're causing her to commit adultery. And if you divorce your wife in order to marry another woman, you're committing adultery. You know, we don't like to hear this, but this is the teaching of the gospel, and we need to live according to the gospel. We need to live according to the teachings of the Lord, and so the Lord condemned divorce. This is very important. The Lord condemned divorce. You know, and then over the course of the centuries, through the weakness of the flesh, I suppose, the church began to be more lenient, and probably especially in the starting in the 20th century, when it would countenance remarriage after divorce. There's a myth going around that people could be, you got 3 chances. You don't like the first one, you can get rid of him and have another husband. If you don't like him, you can get rid of him, and the 3rd time's the charm, right? Well, that's the church. The church permits it, but the question is it unto salvation? And that's a serious question. Is it unto salvation? I would think if we go by a strict teaching of the gospel, it's not unto salvation. So none of this is news to anybody, right?
No.
Yeah, right. You've all read these texts, and most of this is basically common sense. People get themselves involved in all sorts of things. I've been hearing confessions for almost 30 years, and I don't think there's anything I haven't heard that people have gotten themselves into one way or another. Sometimes I tease people, okay, life confession, surprise me. Tell me something I haven't heard. But essentially what that means is we all sin, we all fall short. So when you go to confession or when we go to confession, it's like, okay, join the club. Who doesn't do that? But just in confessing it, in repenting of it, in asking God for forgiveness of it, we're healed. We're healed. Now, it may take a while for that healing to sink in. It may take a while for us to accept that healing and to work it through. But whatever it is and however we have sinned, the church basically, in its wisdom, wants to give people another chance. And so we've come to this place where we tolerate divorce and remarriage. But it's not ideal. And the ideal thing is to have a couple come together and from their youth and who remain completely dedicated to one another, and to come together in marriage and to remain married until death. And if one dies before the other one just waits. That is, the one who's previously died waits to be joined by their spouse. And that's the tradition. That's the tradition. Or simply remain single. Having a child out of wedlock or sex outside of marriage is understood to be a grave sin. And the reason is that the context for sex, according to the church, is a committed relationship of love. That there's an absolute commitment between the two to remain married for their whole lives and to work out any difficulties. And it's within that commitment of love and that mutual commitment that marriage can become fruitful. That you can bring children into the world. That the children will have a secure home. That the love of the parents for one another will come to extend to the children, so that the children won't be neglected or abused or or taken for granted. And so, so traditionally, it's nothing unusual in a traditional Orthodox home to have 10 or 15 children. It's a lot of work, but it creates very strong families. Even 5 or 6 would be good. But it's, of course, as God gives. But it needs to be as God gives and not according to my selfishness. One of the things that I've found is that if a culture values virginity and consecrated virginity, as in monasticism, it's also going to value marriage. A culture that doesn't value virginity and consecrated virginity doesn't value marriage. Protestantism, for example, places no value on virginity. They place no value on the Virgin Mary, the ultimate in virginity. And so what do you have? Marriage is not sacramental, and so many people, just are suffer from divorce after divorce after divorce. And then the secular world has absolutely no concept. I mean, it ridicules virginity. And what do you have? If you have marriages, they tend to be serial. And what does every divorce and breakup mean? Pain. Layers and layers and layers and layers of pain. And so it's no wonder that our culture is nuts. You've got people who are hurting so much. They're looking for consolation wherever they can find it. And this is a grave problem. I think in the church, if we hold fast to these values, and we live according to them as far as we can, at least from the time we enter the church, letting the past be the past, which is the whole idea of baptism anyway, or part of the idea. Then we can start to rebuild society as we watch secular society and post-Christian society collapse around us, which is exactly what it's doing.